Good evening, everyone. Hello. So there's already a lot of comments in the stream. I will end up missing a lot of these, I'm afraid. But there's quite a lot, more than usual. It might be that there's been quite a lot of news this week. What I thought I would start off with, because you can't really pick one particular news issue and just say, well, this is like the one sticking its head above the parapet at the moment, because there's been so many. But I think it is worth doing something which is to consider what sort of a week we've had. Because if you think back to the start of Monday and you look back to where we are now, you could almost be forgiven for thinking, did that all happen inside 1 week? So I want to take you through the week, particularly for people who may not have sort of sat back and thought about it since. So on Monday, things were going brilliantly for Rishi Sunak in two ways. So that's when he announced his Windsor framework. Do you remember that? That seemed like a few months ago. That was on Monday. And then, and it had two benefits. First of all, it was a real show of him stamping his authority on the party, because he'd got the support of people like Steve Baker, as well as, of course, the ERG members of his cabinet. No resignations. Steve Baker, not a member of the cabinet, but a minister, and he was reportedly on resignation watch. No, he loved it. And the other thing that was happening on Monday is Keir Starmer was given a keynote speech on the economy, which he's been trying to plug for the rest of the week, not getting a word in edgeways. No one knows about it, really. It's a bit unfair, but that is politics for you. So Sunak scored two wins. First of all, he boosted his own image, because this is, even for people who don't really understand what's going on in the protocol, it's seen as a big win. It'll take the edge off it if the DUP don't go along with it, but there you go. But at least it settles it for people in Britain, which is where he needs to attract votes. And second of all, he pissed on Keir Starmer's bonfire. So brilliant for Rishi Sunak. Tuesday, that's when the Telegraph starts publishing some of these WhatsApp messages. So all of a sudden, you're putting the focus back onto what went on in the pandemic. Now, granted, not awkward for Sunak at this stage, because the Telegraph are one of those papers who tried to argue against, not just lockdown, they're trying to make it a lockdown thing, like there's all these people who wanted lockdowns. No one wanted lockdowns. Nobody wanted lockdowns. But they were the ones who didn't want the measures put in place to avoid the lockdowns. But that all blew up. But for Sunak, it was still fine, because it was, there was still the news there about the Windsor Agreement, and it was all looking very positive for him. Then on Wednesday, Lord Bethell, who was one of the people on the, he's a Tory peer in the House of Lords, and he's one of the people that was involved in the government's pandemic response. He thought he was helping by saying, well, at one point we thought we might have to kill every cat in the country. I'm not sure that was helping. In reality, of course, there was no such plan. Absolute nonsense. But I don't think that really helped. Then towards the end on Wednesday, the news is leaked that Starmer has hired Sue Gray. And this is when the wheels really fell off, because then Thursday, the Tories flipped their lids. In doing so, dragged Partygate back up. Now, the thing is, if you try and read the Tory media, or if you're on social media like Twitter, I like Twitter, and you're just listening to what all these Tory commentators and politicians are saying, you would think that, oh, is there a danger here that they're like, it's going to do some good for Boris Johnson, because they're trying to suggest that she wasn't fit and all the rest of it. And it's like, no, this is the stupidest thing they've done for a while. Partygate is their Achilles heel. Partygate is what caused Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson was already losing some popularity because of the Owen Paterson scandal, but Partygate is what really blew it open. That is what they could have recovered from the Owen Paterson scandal. It would have been forgotten about now. Partygate will never be forgotten, and the reason is, it's not just Boris Johnson failing to adhere to certain standards. There are people whose friends or relatives died alone because he said they couldn't be with them. And some of them had no choice in the matter, but some of them did. Some of them could have physically gone and visited them, because there was no one stopping them. They didn't because the law said they couldn't. So they applied some sort of self-control that clearly Boris Johnson was incapable of. So, and that's what, unfortunately, these Tories don't, on their little echo chamber, in their little echo chamber, don't seem to understand, because most of them weren't following those rules anyway. So they haven't been personally stung. Because as Nigel Farage came out today and said, well, I've always been open about the fact I ignored the rules. So they don't get that for a lot of ordinary people, this still stings because their friend or relative is still dead and they still died alone, and that will forever be the case. So bringing up Partygate was insane. Then, of course, yesterday we have, in a very timely manner, the Privileges Committee revealing their most damaging evidence, which they need Boris Johnson to answer questions about. Boris Johnson's trying to claim, oh, there's no evidence in there that I knew anything. It's like, no, there's never any evidence that Boris Johnson ever knows anything. But in actual fact, the evidence is very damning. You know, if you read anything other than the Daily Mail or the Daily Express, it's quite clear that it's incredibly damaging. And then we start to get, last night I think it was, the messages about the Eat Out to Help Out and about how it was massively increased the number of infections, and the government acted to suppress that information. And that's what's going to start making it now tricky for Sunak. When the WhatsApp messages were first blown open on Tuesday, it was not harmful to Sunak. All of a sudden now it could be. So now where we are is, at the start of the week, Sunak was, the Tories in general probably having their best week in ages. If they'd have kicked off from there, they could have started to make some inroads in their polling again. I mean, I strongly suspect they wouldn't have done, because they're not prepared to do very much at all to engage with the public. But in theory, they could have done. Whereas now, where's it gone? Now, at the end of the week, Sunak is now having to be concerned about these WhatsApp messages. You know, all the infighting is going on over Boris Johnson again. Now there's some trying to claim, oh, he never should have been brought down. He was never brought down by Sue Gray's report anyway, and the Privileges Committee are not using Sue Gray's report. It's absolute nonsense. But anyway, there it is. And I will just point out, for those who may not have seen it, actually, it might be worth me just pointing out how potentially damaging these WhatsApp messages may be to Rishi Sunak. So here, 24th of August 2020, Matt Hancock saying, explain, said, just want you to let you know directly that we've had lots of feedback that Eat Out to Help Out is causing problems in intervention areas. I've kept it out of the news, but it's serious. So please, please, let's not allow the economic success of the scheme to lead to its extension. And Simon Case there saying, have you told Rishi? And Hancock said, which I think is odd. Should the cabinet secretary really be referring to a minister by the first name? But maybe they should. I don't know what sort of relationship they have. But anyway, Matt Hancock then says, yes, we've told the Treasury. And then there's another one a few months later where they're joking, and Matt Hancock's joking, oh, Rishi hasn't launched another Eat Out to help out the virus. This is what he called it. Eat Out to help the virus get about. That's what Matt Hancock was causing Rishi Sunak's scheme, which is what many of us were calling it at the time, because that's what it was. It was fairly obvious to anyone paying attention that that's what it was. So this could be damaging to Sunak, because Sunak was behind that scheme. And the other thing to bear in mind, I might talk about this more tomorrow, the other thing to bear in mind is, at the moment, it could look like this is revenge against Matt Hancock, these WhatsApp messages. It won't just be revenge against Matt Hancock, even though Isabel Oakeshott was very much against Matt Hancock's efforts during the pandemic. Because as you know, I mean, a lot of people will be rightly angry at Matt Hancock. He was the health secretary. He did preside over many, many deaths. But bizarrely, he was one of the more sane ones. He was actually one of the ones trying to argue that Johnson should be listening more to the scientific advisors. You know, a lot of the policies he went ahead with, which resulted in unnecessary deaths, were just because he didn't care rather than actively wanted them. Sunak was the same. He also constantly argued for Johnson to listen to the scientific advice. So Oakeshott will want to deal with him as well. But also, Hancock it is only revenge with him, because what's the point? He's already dead and buried. His political career is basically over. Whereas Rishi Sunak is the Prime Minister still. So it may be that they're tilting now towards undermining Sunak, particularly with the infighting, the little civil war starting up again. So we'll just have to see what happens there. Right, I'm going to miss a load of comments here, but let's just try and catch a few. All seems to be shaping up in a way that the Tories will end up presenting themselves as EU champions by the next election, while Starmer's left stuttering in the wind about never joining the single market. No, this will 100% not be the case. What Rishi Sunak has done is a small part of what Labour wanted to do anyway. Labour, in fact, I was saying this, I was on the SMR thing that's going to be broadcast on Monday. Labour are delighted with Rishi Sunak for getting this and for facing. Again, people have this funny idea Keir Starmer's now a Brexiteer. Of course he's not. Were people paying attention to what Keir Starmer was doing and saying for the few between the referendum and leaving the EU? Did they actually pay attention at all? People like David Lammy and Keir Starmer, their opposition to Brexit could not have been made clearer. And they weren't doing it for political reasons, because their leadership at the time wanted the UK out of the EU. So they weren't doing it for any sort of climbing the ladder purposes. In fact, with David Lammy, it effectively froze him out of any sort of influence. But it's... So yeah, they're absolutely anti-Brexit. They haven't suddenly changed it. And you think, so what was it that caused them all to change their minds at the same time? Was it because it's the strategic position to adopt in order to make it Labour electable? Or was it because they all got hit on the head at the same time? It's because it's strategic. It's really that simple. And what is strategic for Labour is strategic for the Conservatives. So it's impossible for the Conservatives ever to go further than Labour would do. In fact, Labour will go further and faster, because they do not have any internal resistance to moving much closer to even rejoining the EU. If it weren't for those target swing voters, Labour could actually explicitly say, look, we can't do it quickly or easily, it's a long slog, but actually, yes, we're going to move in the direction that could one day lead to rejoining the EU. They could say that if it weren't for that small number of voters who are absolutely crucial to deciding who the next government is. Don't I think Partygate is now a damp squib? Surely it's already pissed off everyone who left to turn against the Tories. The damage has already been done. It has been done, but the thing is, whenever it's brought back to public mind, it pisses people off all over again. So, and you can understand Labour wanted to bring it up again. I point to again this Privileges Committee inquiry. Who created that? Basically, Keir Starmer. This Privileges Committee investigation into Boris Johnson is entirely in Labour's favour. Other opposition MPs as well, of course, but in Labour's favour. That's why they basically trapped the Tories into having to go ahead with it. So why on earth Conservatives, and the reason they did it is because they know Partygate is deeply, deeply damaging, and the more information that comes out, the better. Because we've now got, look what happened. So first of all, we've got information on Partygate from 4 sources. First of all, the media, leaks to the media. So that was reported on, so we got some information there. Then the Sue, well, actually, I suppose technically it was first the Met investigation. So the Met investigation, even though the Sue Gray investigation took place first, we didn't get the report. We got an interim report. So the Met Police investigation added some new information. The Sue Gray report actually only added a small amount of new information. There wasn't really that much new in it, but there was some. And now the Privileges Committee investigation has created more new information. And all of this is because, and it's to Labour's benefit, because Partygate is really very, very damaging. It's not blowing over, and it's not going to blow over. You know, people will not find peace with Partygate until everyone perceived to be responsible, which is mostly Boris Johnson, is gone from politics. And yet he's trying to hang on. So the no, it's not a damp squib. The But it's why the Tories are absolutely insane to want to bring it back up. Why would they want to bring Partygate back up? Why would they want to try and refight the Partygate battles? You would think they want to keep as quiet as possible about it. They can't have it ignored completely because of this inquiry, which is now, you know, in a couple of weeks' time, going to have Boris Johnson saying something. But anyway. Right, can I please explain to you why some of us on the left in the UK are still supporting Putin in his imperialism, please? Because it goes back to the Cold War. I mean, it's more surprising when you've got young people. They're just indoctrinated. It goes back to the Cold War, which was, I mean, basically between the United States and its allies and the Soviet Union and its allies. Hence, we have these terms first, second and third world. I mean, we nowadays use these as terms for like standard of living, but it wasn't. First world countries were the ones aligned with the United States. Second world countries were the ones aligned with the Soviet Union, and third world countries were basically the neutral countries. We associate them with like poorer living standards because most of them were in Africa. They were the ones who didn't care either side. You know, they weren't interested in the petty battles of either side. But back then, it was billed as being capitalism versus communism. Or if you didn't like communism, you could say socialism, but there's nothing really socialist about the Soviet Union. So, well, I mean, there was an attempt. Obviously, it wasn't an attempt at communism. It just fell on its ass. So, obviously, if you were very far to the left, you would want the Soviet Union project to succeed. Despite the terrible conditions that some of its people lived in. But then you could see people in capitalist Western countries living in terrible conditions as well, of course. You know, so the way they saw it is they aligned themselves on the side of the Soviet Union, of the second world countries. So after the end of the Cold War, because they're so entrenched in that thinking, and despite the fact that Putin's Russia is the furthest thing from a communist project, that they still align themselves on that side. Do you know what it's a bit like? It's a bit like being a football fan and you support some team or other, and you know, and things are going all right, they're competing, they may or may not be winning, but they're competing, and then all of a sudden they're rubbish and they start dropping down the divisions or something like that, and you still support them because you did support them, and why would you stop supporting them? It's sort of a little bit like that. So they turn a blind eye to, you know, so they'll attack Western countries for doing anything, any sort of geopolitics, whether it be unpleasant forms, like, for example, strong arming other countries or even invading other countries, but they'll also do it for just, you know, getting involved and doing anything anywhere. They will attack it. Whereas exactly the same actions, if they're taken by, say, China or Russia, then they ignore it completely. So, you know, that's the reason. And there'll always be a small core of them, because as I say, I mean, part of me at one time thought, well, you know, when they've all got old and died, then hopefully that'll be that. But it won't be, because you see some young people as well in there, so they're indoctrinating others as well, just, you know. But they'll never be anywhere near, you know, normal public opinion. But, and you know, not just because they're not organised, because how can you? You basically, for them to get their views being made mainstream in a country, you've got to get the vast majority of the country to hate their own country. It's like, well, people, rightly or wrongly, are on the side of their country usually. But anyway, right, so many things we're going to be bouncing around on here. Hancock's is in trouble for handing over those WhatsApp messages. Well, we'll have to see. We will have to see. But obviously, it was a stunningly stupid move. Stunningly stupid. Can't actually understand it. Could Labour incentivise landlords to invest in renewable development instead? Two birds, one stone. I'm not sure how that works. Like, if someone's got a house that they rent out, how are they going to? How's that going to work? I mean, even the Conservative government have put policies in place that are going to encourage more solar with new builds. You know, that's the thing now. although it took a very long time for it to happen. You know, so we'll slowly go that, and we'll go that way much more quickly with Labour. But I'm not sure how you get landlords to do it. But anyway. This currently looks like the 21st century version of House of Cards. Who is taking on the Francis Urquhart role? Surely not Hancock now. I mean, it is very much literally a House of Cards, this. And you always felt like as soon as Boris Johnson went, the whole house has come tumbling down. You know, Jonathan... hang on, who am I thinking of now? Who was it? Oh, no. The Jonathan Agnew's pissing cricket one. I'm going to really embarrass now. The other Agnew, Lord Agnew, what's his first name? He used to be a Labour minister, and the name has now completely gone from my head. But he was saying, Andrew Adonis, that's why it's not Agnew, idiot. Andrew Adonis, now it makes sense. So he was saying, when Boris Johnson falls, Brexit will fall. Now, of course, you know, it is not really that simple, but what he was suggesting is that the particular attitude on Brexit would collapse very quickly, which it sort of has under Sunak. You know, as I say, we've literally gone from turning our backs to the EU for 6 years to suddenly facing them again. Shall I repost them? You always have to repost the comments, I'm afraid, if I've not picked them up. And there's about a 10-second delay, so if I've not picked them up in about 20 seconds, they're probably gone. Why does Johnson have more of a cult following than Blair or Thatcher? I don't know that he really does. I don't think he's a Trump. He has... it is a small number, a tiny number, but they're incredibly wealthy and influential. So they basically control the Tory media. And the reason is because he was very obliging. He did what they wanted. The reason is, ultimately, Boris Johnson, for someone like Rupert Murdoch and his ilk, Boris Johnson was the perfect Prime Minister. First of all, he had absolutely no political mission. There was nothing he wanted to do. Absolutely nothing. He just wanted to be Prime Minister. He didn't want to do anything with that power, which made him incredibly malleable. You know, it was like he'd be quite happy to do anything that allowed him to stay on as Prime Minister. He had no morals. He was incredibly deluded. He was a very effective liar. You know, so you wouldn't shame him if you persuaded him as a very influential and wealthy backer to pursue an insane policy. You wouldn't shame him into backing down on it. I mean, consider the in 2020 that policy they had to start literally starving kids over summer, and he got his MPs to try and defend it and all the rest of it. Eventually they had to U-turn. The only reason they had to U-turn is because his advisor says, you know, we're going to lose a lot of voters over this, because that's all he cares about. Is he going to carry on being Prime Minister? So for people like that, he is the perfect Prime Minister. He does exactly what they want because he doesn't care. You know, whereas someone like Rishi Sunak might be equally as you know, dismissive of the plight of people who really need the government. But he also has things he wants to do, which is an interference, because he will prioritise those over what they want him to do. Was Sunak's Northern Ireland gaffe actually a strong hint of heading towards the EU? It's difficult to say. It could be, but it could equally have been, bear in mind he was in Northern Ireland at the time and speaking to a Northern Irish audience. It could well be that all he was trying to do was lay on good and thick the benefits of this agreement for all sides, all political persuasions in Northern Ireland. So, because ideally, from Rishi Sunak's point of view, the deal is going to be done. The deal is, that's it now. There is no bringing the deal down. It doesn't matter what Jamie Bryson thinks. But it would be beneficial if power sharing could be re-established in Stormont, which by the sounds of it, it's probably not going to be anytime soon, but maybe it will in, later on this year, who knows. So but it's very difficult to say whether Sunak said that because it's what he genuinely believes and that he wants a much closer relationship with the EU, or was he just saying it to sell his deal in Northern Ireland? Bear in mind, Boris Johnson used to say one thing to one audience and a contradictory thing to another audience, and he didn't care one jot about it. Let's hope Bojo gets booted out by the Privileges Committee, shall we? Want to be able to chant Bojo's on his way out after the investigation. That will not occur. He may well be. I think he's probably going to be found guilty. If you look at the evidence, it's a bit like, yeah, there's no real way of getting out of that. He will try, we got a little preview of what he's going to be like in the inquiry, in the oral hearing, on that interview he did on yesterday. He's just going to argue black is white again. Whatever. Basically he's adopting the idiot defence. I was too stupid to know that these things were against the law and no one told me. And it's like, here are some messages of people talking about it. Yeah, but they didn't tell me. These are the people who advise you. Yeah, but they didn't tell me. That's what he's going to do. So it's the idiot defence. But it doesn't really matter. So let's say he's found guilty. He may or may not get a lengthy suspension. It might not be. Maybe he only gets 5 days. But let's say it's a lengthy suspension. 10 days or more. Or 2 full weeks. 2 full sitting weeks. So then the recall petition will absolutely succeed. No question about it. So then he's no longer an MP. But that doesn't mean to say he's on his way out. Because at the moment you wouldn't know he's an MP now anyway. So he will carry on agitating and while he seeks another way back in. Now he could stand in his own by-election. I don't think he will, because he will lose it. He will lose it. So I think he will dodge that one and he will try and pop up in a safe seat somewhere else. Now he'll have to have some excuse for that. Why aren't you sitting in your own seat? He may say, look, this is all a witch hunt. I need a bit of time. I've made a bit of time away. I'm going to take a month out and consider a few things, or maybe a few months out. And then he'll tip someone the nod to stand down in a safe seat that supports him, because he does have some supporters. I'll tell you what will be hilarious, and then he'll just wheedle his way. Bear in mind, he's trying to buy a house in Oxfordshire at the moment. That's nowhere near his constituency. So it's like he's already planning on trying to find a safe seat. Anyway, he doesn't even want to fight his current constituency seat at the next election. He wants to pop up somewhere else. So he's, I think he'll wait for a safe seat. I'll tell you what would be hilarious though. Let's say someone steps down. Let's say Nadine Dorries. I don't know where I don't think she's Oxfordshire. He must have someone lined up in Oxfordshire to stand down for him. But anyway, let us say this happens, and let's say he loses that seat, because in a by-election, in the general election, then obviously the Tories are not actually going to lose like most of their seats. They're going to lose a hefty number, we hope, but it's not going to be like over half of them. But in a by-election, all of them are quite vulnerable. All of them. Nadine Dorries in Bedfordshire, is she okay? I have no idea where that is in relation to Oxfordshire, but I recognise that is not the same as Oxfordshire. Excuse me. It could be hilarious if he tried to pop up. Because the thing is as well, if he's no longer an MP, he cannot challenge Sunak. There's no point in his supporters trying to bring Sunak down. I don't think they're going to be able to do that anyway. Admittedly, these WhatsApp messages need paying attention to, because that could be a new factor here. Because that was another thing. As of Monday afternoon, whenever it was quite clear that Boris Johnson at that point was finished. It didn't even need all this damaging evidence from the Privileges Committee anymore. Boris Johnson was done for. The WhatsApp messages could be interesting. You still don't imagine that it's possible to replace Sunak with Johnson. But if the WhatsApp messages are used to damage Sunak, I don't think it brings Johnson back into play, but it might bring a general election. Because I also thought with Sunak asserting his authority, the window for a general election this year was gone. I still think it almost certainly is. But you just, maybe there's something in these WhatsApp messages. We'll have to see. After Sunak's speech in Ireland recently, I thought he was auditioning for the next hole of Bullseye. Look at what you could have won. Yeah, a lot of people made that comment, didn't they? It's and that is inevitably how it will be seen in Britain from anyone who is keeping any sort of close eye on this at all. He admitted he was at the most unsocially distanced party in the UK. Well, so were Todd. I don't think that's in one of the actually, I can't remember, but there was allusions to it in the evidence. But of course, the evidence isn't oral evidence, like it's not recordings. It's the messages about it. But anyway, could Johnson do an Enoch Powell and stand for the DUP in Northern Ireland? He'd be welcome to. I suspect not. He'd be welcome to though. Hope Sunak blocks him. Yeah, well, that could be politically tricky. Do you know what it depends on? Is just how much support Boris Johnson's got within the party, the membership, that is. It's quite clear he doesn't have much popularity in the parliamentary party right now, or at least much confidence, shall we say. How much has he got in the party? I don't know. If he is still considered to be very popular amongst the membership, it would be a bold move from Sunak to block Boris Johnson standing as a candidate, because that would set the cat amongst the pigeons. And it's something, it wouldn't be worth his while unless he thought Johnson still presented a threat to him, because that would create an unnecessary civil war within the party if he were to do that. So he would only do it if he thought Johnson was a serious threat. So I suspect he probably wouldn't do that. Telegraph doesn't like Johnson. They're funny ones though. They fall in and out of bed with him. I mean, obviously he used to work for the Telegraph. And if you think about the three, I always ignore the Sun because I hardly ever have a look at even the front page. But if you look at like the three most rabid Tory rags, Sun excluded, the Mail, the Express, and the Telegraph. The Telegraph has been the one that has only offered qualified support for Johnson while he was Prime Minister. That is true. And when he's messed up, they've not been shy about saying he's messed up. But they have still covered for him a bit as well. So, I mean, I think it's quite... I'll tell you what I think about Oakeshott leaking these messages via the Telegraph. She's employed by Murdoch's media group, right? So you would think the Times would have been the outlet to leak it all through, to publish it through. Why didn't she? Why has she gone to someone else's stable? And it must be that for her own political intentions, the Telegraph was suitable. And the Telegraph were very much anti-restriction. I think Boris just enjoys a fight. He needs to stay in the limelight because of his ego, so whether negative or positive press doesn't matter, he loves the attention. He may well love the attention, he does not love a fight there. We know from people who've worked with him, whether they've been his friends or just people who've begrudgingly worked with him, what they've all consistently said is that Boris Johnson is conflict averse. He hates it. He will, if someone comes storming into his office not happy about something, he will say whatever is necessary to calm them down and get them to go away. He absolutely hates conflict. As I say, we get that consistently from people who've worked for him for a great many years, some of whom are his allies, some of whom are not. They all say the same thing. So he's absolutely not relishing a fight. He hates fighting. Is it me or Streeting's goal? So this is Labour's Shadow Health Secretary to end the GP partnership model, introduce a self-referral process would see patients bypassing primary care utterly preposterous. So I have a couple of thoughts on it, on that one. First of all, there are some things which other like perfectly functional healthcare systems around the world can demonstrate. There are some things for which self-referral may work. My concern is that the problem with general practice is you often miss things. So something that just looks like something minor can easily be dismissed. So you can argue to yourself, okay, well, we you know, if you refer yourself to an expert, the problem is you shouldn't do. I don't think you should do it for any symptoms that could be lots. If, for example, you had a skin condition, I'm still not sure that referring yourself to a dermatologist is the best course of action, because you will still be using up time in the queue and you might just have something that the GP could have subscribed and deal with it. But what I will say is, if there is something on your skin, then a dermatologist will certainly get to the bottom of it. You know, what I have concerns about is when they talked about symptoms which could have been any number of things, like, well, who do you even refer yourself to? You'd need to be a doctor of at least GP level to actually even know what sort of specialist to send you to. And even that would probably come after tests. So some of the, and again, I haven't seen the detailed policy, so I can only go on the rhetoric. And I always say, you know, always be wary of rhetoric. It's designed to appeal to voters. The policy is what matters. Some of the rhetoric employed around this self-referral idea does seem a bit suboptimal, in all honesty. But some of it, you know, there are things for which, you know, if it is clear where you would need to refer yourself, then I think that's fine. And again, it does work. I mean, I say I think it's fine. I'm not medically qualified. I don't know what works and what doesn't. But I know in other countries, sometimes you do have self-referrals and their systems work fine. Will Sunak cut off the money paying Boris's legal fees? I strongly suspect not. I don't think he dares. I think he's already been cheeky enough, because obviously the fact. So what happened with all the evidence that the Privileges Committee wanted? So they asked for it when Boris Johnson was still Prime Minister, and Boris Johnson handed it over, and lo and behold, it was all redacted. Basically, what he sent them was a load of documents that looked like that. Oh no, it's because I got the V cam on. That looked like that. That's what he sent them. A load of, except they had a load of black lines on it, of course. He sent them a load of, oh, here's all the evidence you want. Sorry, we've had to cross most of it out. And when they say most of it, they mean almost all of it. So then what happened is the committee obviously weren't impressed with that, said, no, we are a parliamentary select committee. We are superior to the government. You are going to give us the information we want. Lots of that over summer. Then all of a sudden, Rishi Sunak becomes Prime Minister, and the committee go to Rishi Sunak, look, mate, we've got a problem here. We want a load of this evidence. To which Rishi Sunak apparently went, oh, you want all this evidence? All right, here you go. And he gave it to them all unredacted. So, yeah. So that has done Johnson no good at all. It could be argued that they would have got the information anyway, because they are a select committee. The government cannot deny them. It just may have taken even long. We think it's taken a long time already. It could have taken even longer. Do I think Oakeshott will stand as a candidate for Reform UK at the next election? No. She makes far too much money talking shit in the papers. What do I make of Jean-Claude Juncker saying, I don't see any chance whatsoever and wheresoever and whensoever see Britain rejoin the European Union? Same as anyone else. You can look at the situation as it exists now, and it depends what you base it on. Like, if you're basing it on the idea that the UK just fundamentally doesn't seem to want to get on board with the political reasons for the EU existing, And you look at the process that's involved and you think to yourself, right, so the process would mean having to reform our system of elections because that doesn't pass, agree to adopt the euro, blah, 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 blah. All of these things we'd have to do, all these hoops we'd have to jump through. And you're looking at a country that's stuck up, that's got its head up its own arse and thinks it's better than everyone else. And you look at that and you think to yourself, yeah, there's no real way that we're going to be going back, is there? But as I keep arguing, ultimately it's doing us too much damage. If you look at lots of how many other countries of Europe at some time or other in the past 150 years have had the same level of arrogance knocked out of them because they've gone and done something ludicrously stupid. And we have done the same thing now. And you just look at the younger generations coming through and they've got a completely different attitude. You know, the British character does change. There's, you know, these traditionalists like, oh, this is the British character. The British character changes every few generations. You know, the British character that existed post-war, very different to the one that exists for my generation, and the one that exists from, you know, the young people is different again. So, you know, we will rejoin, that is certain. Juncker is potentially just not taking into account the fact that if you're looking far ahead into the future, we are going to have a very, very, very different sort of society. Assuming we haven't set fire to it all with climate change, that is. Assuming we can actually do something about that. Because we are an island, you would think we'd be fairly concerned about climate change. Much more concerned than we seem to be. I'm saying as someone who's conflict averse, I'm amazed you think Bojo is. If Bojo was conflict averse, he'd try to avoid all possibility of conflict. He's in the wrong line of work for that. No, he does. He avoids all conflict. All of it. All of it. Anyone like Dominic Cummings always used to say when he was still there before he was sacked that he would make sure he was the last person in the room after a meeting, because whoever was the last person in the room got to decide what Boris Johnson decided. Because you go to Boris Johnson, you say we should do this thing, and he'd go, all right then. And then the next person goes, no, we should do this thing. All right then. He is absolutely conflict averse. There's too many people that have worked with him in too many different capacities, all intelligent people, all saying the same thing for it not to be true. You know, think about all the things, like why did he hide, for example, from the trickier interviews and TV debates 2019? Because he hates it. Absolutely hates it. He only agreed to go on interviews and debates where he knew that the person presenting it all would let him do what he wanted. I think the PM should be confirmed by a House of Commons vote and not automatically be the leader of the largest party. The problem with something like that, though, is you could actually destabilise the government unnecessarily. I think it's fine as it is. It is all right as it is. Because otherwise, yeah, there's no sense in destabilising the government without any good reason to do so. It wouldn't help anything. It doesn't help for us to have an unstable government. At the moment, it can help us if the government can't govern at all and has to trigger a general election. But it doesn't help to have the government unstable but still persistent. Breaking news in the Guardian: senior Tory MPs turn on Johnson, claiming he's gone full on Trump. Well, there's been a few. Let's have a look. There's been a few people saying that recently. Yeah, I'm just seeing this story now. He's gone full Trump. I mean, the thing is though, he's not Trump. Going back to that comment about, you know, the cult. Trump has a cult. Admittedly, he's in dead lumber. He's not going to be able to use it to win power again. But Johnson never had a cult. If you think about it, like people in this country, the public turned on him. Yes, of course, there'll still be members of the public who still like him, but they've basically turned on him. The reason they got rid of Boris Johnson, like, Republicans had the chance to get rid of Donald Trump, but they didn't do because he was still very popular. He still had his cult. Johnson, they could easily get rid of Johnson because he's got no one. He's got some wealthy backers, but he hasn't got the public on his side. You know, so Johnson is unable to actually mobilise a large number of people. Like, we were all very worried about what Trump may do when he lost the election. Indeed, on January the 6th of the following year, we saw, you know, because he had the capacity to mobilise a lot of people. And America is a country where the people you can mobilise have guns. Johnson doesn't have anything. If Johnson were to go on television and call for a demonstration in London or anywhere in the country to demonstrate public support for him, 10 people would turn up, and 2 of those people would be Nadine Dorries and Jacob Rees-Mogg. So, you know, he hasn't got any sort of support base. He's got a small number of very, very wealthy and well-connected people. Have we ever had such a thing as a stable government in my view? Oh yeah. The government, the coalition government of 2010 to 2015 was stable. It destabilised the country, but the government itself was stable. The Labour government was perfectly stable. John Major's government was stable. Thatcher's government was stable. The Labour government before that was not so stable. But generally speaking, they are perfectly stable. You know, we just haven't had a stable government for some time. We didn't have a stable government between 2015. Between 2017 and 2019 it was unstable because the Tories didn't have the numbers and they themselves were splitting up into factions. But when they won that majority, was it stable then? No, because Boris Johnson was in charge and he had no coherent plan to govern. So there was no stability there. They just hid their instability behind COVID for a while and their common approach to Brexit at the time, because they were still in the honeymoon period of Brexit where the consequences hadn't happened. As soon as the consequences of Brexit hit, that's when the cracks started to appear. I mean, we'd have to bear in mind that Boris Johnson lost a by-election in a safe Tory seat before the scandals. In 2021, summer of 2021, he lost Chesham and Amersham. That was a safe Tory seat. And it was before the Owen Paterson scandal. It was before the Partygate scandals. It was before anyone knew that Boris Johnson had been sticking 2 fingers up at the public. He was still getting his vaccine bounce, and he lost that safe Tory seat. And that was because of his policies, the way he was approaching government. So it's not been stable really since. It's been quiet. It's been like an active volcano since 2017. It's just that sometimes it's gone a bit quiet, but it has always been unstable. How many Tories do I reckon could hide in a fridge? Well, it depends. Boris Johnson hid in a very big fridge in 2019. Sweden has a system where the MPs have to vote on the government and the PM has caused us a lot of trouble. I mean, any system, all systems have their... Any system that comes into being, by definition, will have its advantages. Otherwise, no one would have ever introduced the system. They all have their pros and cons at certain times. Like, you can look at the particular problem we have with the government now and think, if we had this in place or that in place, then that would have helped that. And it's like, yeah, it might have done. But then if you had a different sort of government, it wouldn't, or it might make things worse. So it is very difficult. Should politicians have minimum standards imposed as regard numeracy and critical thinking? You can't. Universal suffrage, which I'm a big supporter of, holds that anyone, you know, above a certain age anyway, should be able to vote. And if anyone should be able to vote, anyone should be able to stand for Parliament as well. If Parliament is going to represent the people, it has to be formed from the people. And that means you cannot exclude people from standing. Except for very, very specific things. You know, you have to sort of say that if universal suffrage means anything, people have the right to elect whomever they see fit. Maybe a very small number of caveats. So you can't exclude people on the basis of their education. Apart from anything else, there'll be a lot of good MPs, genuine MPs, that do not have a good education. So that, you know, ridiculous gaffe of... Usually we have a system that means that it tends to be intelligent and even if they didn't have a great education when they were young, have educated themselves. So the ones who are more educated and intelligent tend to rise to the top. But you cannot exclude MPs on the basis of a level of education, because that also excludes good MPs who were just disadvantaged. Randy there saying, don't see a problem with the euro. The pound looks the same. We can call it what we like. For us, yes. For us, it makes no difference. A lot of transactions are digital anyway. Doesn't really matter. But there are advantages in retaining access to your own national currency, because if we were to adopt the euro, it means our government lose control over monetary policy. It's not that we have no control. Obviously, we would have a big say because we'd be one of the larger economies in the Eurozone. So we would have a fairly hefty say. But with the pound, we have 100%. I say we, the government has 100% of the say. In theory, the Bank of England decides a certain amount of monetary policy. And yes, it is independent, sort of. But the government effectively can control monetary policy. It loses that. So there are good reasons not to adopt it. It's not good enough for my money to stay outside of the EU. And I'll tell you, especially if it means that we cannot rejoin the single market and customs union, because arguably the easiest way to rejoin the single market, customs union should be straightforward at some point, but the single market, the easiest way to rejoin it is just to rejoin the EU. Because who wants to be in the single market anyway without any major say on the rules? Like without, I mean, you can have a say, but we won't have a vote. That, you know, for a small economy, you might think that's okay because you're like for Norway, for example, they may be perfectly happy with that arrangement because they wouldn't get much of a say anyway. Like their allocation of seats in the European Parliament wouldn't be that great, you know. So, but for a large economy and a large country, but anyway. People used to ask if TV could produce a series like The West Wing over here, in that the president was a decent man. Over here we have Johnson, Sunak and Truss. See, I never watched that, so I have no idea about it. I would argue you will get some heads of government in lots of countries who actually want to govern for the public good, and we can disagree with them. Like John Major and Margaret Thatcher wanted to govern for the public good. We just disagree on exactly what their idea of the public was. But they were genuine. Whereas what we've had since David, and it's not just since Boris Johnson, since David Cameron, we have had people who have not had any regard whatsoever for the public good. Theresa May, you could argue, did, but it was way down the list of priorities for her. Rishi Sunak, say he might be in the same camp as Theresa May, but I don't know that because I don't really know what he wants to do. Will Labour win more seats in Scotland now the SNP don't have a strong leader anymore? I think there's a very strong possibility of that. It doesn't always follow. We might find that whoever wins at the moment, Humza Yousaf, I think, is ahead. I think I saw a poll of party members. They're always a little bit dicey because, I mean, we saw from the Tory leadership contest last year, we had polls as well. And there's always a much larger margin for error with polls of party members than there are for general public. But the lead seems to be fairly substantial. But anyway, it might turn out that despite our impressions at the moment, that, you know, the strategy remains strong, because part of the strategy, of course, will be down to the leader's ability to carry it out and choose the right people. But if they've got the same people advising them, the same strategists, they may still be, you know, even if they lose votes, it doesn't automatically, because we first past the post, if you lose votes, it doesn't automatically mean you lose seats. I mean, I don't think Labour, after the next election in Scotland, are going to be left with one. At the moment, they've got one seat in Scotland, in Westminster seats. I mean, that's not going to be the case. They're clearly going to massively increase that. Will they increase it still further because of Sturgeon stepping down, you would think there's a very good chance. But I mean, we will just have to see. We'll have to see what happens. We don't even know who the next leader is going to be. None of them look impressive, granted. None of them look impressive. But we'll just have to wait until it happens, then give them 6 months and see how the public react to them then. They say the government decides fiscal policy, the Bank of England decides monetary policy. In theory, but the Bank of England has regular meetings with the Chancellor and other senior members of the government. So in reality, the government exert a great deal of control over monetary policy. And we can see that. Bear in mind, it was Labour who made the Bank of England independent. And the behaviour of the Bank of England under Labour is markedly different than it has been under the Conservatives. Since the advent of the Windsor Framework, will the government discontinue the retained EU law bill? See, that's the next little trick, isn't it? Not immediately now. It's still going through. It's still going through Parliament. But the main benefit to Rishi Sunak of the Windsor Framework is that it means he doesn't have to deal with the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill, because that was just a trade war waiting to happen. Well, the retained EU law bill, if it is... See, I still wonder if it will be passed, but maybe in a weakened form. Sunak will not want it to turn into a trade war with the EU. So ideally he would like it to pass, but not to really do anything until Labour in power and leave it for them to deal with. The problem is, will the ERG accept that? That's the question. When you say, I think we can safely say if we'd adopted the euro, we'd never have left Europe. Oh yeah, of course not. But there were good reasons not to. I've always regarded David Cameron, Theresa May, Bojo and Liz Truss as being completely bonkers, but especially the latter two. David Cameron wasn't bonkers. He was just an arsehole. Theresa May as well. She just put party ahead of country. That's all. She had little regard for people. You know, when some people think she had a bit more empathy because she was the one who regarded the Conservative Party as the nasty party, and she was the one who argued we mustn't be seen as the nasty party. But bear in mind, what she was really saying was, we don't want people to perceive us that way. She didn't care that the party were nasty. She only cared that it was seen to be nasty. She was the one who, for example, introduced the hostile environment immigration policy. But neither May nor Cameron were in any way mentally impaired. They were just dickheads. Johnson is clearly a narcissist. I know I'm not a psychologist. He's clearly a narcissist. Therefore, in some way, his perception of reality is distorted. So, you know, nuts to put the crude public use of the word in play. Liz Truss is clearly as mad as a hatter. Absolutely insane. But no, May and Cameron just didn't care about people, or even the country, at least not as much as they did about the other things they prioritised above it. He's saying, Yusuf is the Sturgeon continuity candidate, he won't win. Forbes had a bad opening and will win. Well, I mean, we'll see. I don't know. I can only go by polling. But Forbes, if she does win, surely, I mean, that would be a little bit insane. It's not just that her politics is an outlier in the SNP. That doesn't matter if she's aware of it and accounts for it. It's the fact that she's given every impression that she wants to create policies in line with her own political beliefs, rather than either the electorate, which is much more important, or even the wider party. So if Forbes does win, at that point, I think I can say, yes, Labour will win more seats than they otherwise would have. Is there a dearth of good leadership all over, in all parts and generally internationally? Yes, there's obviously something about politics that prevents decent leaders putting up with it. Certainly in British politics, I don't want to talk too much about like other countries, but certainly in British politics. In American politics, you can argue it's because in order to get anywhere in politics, you need the money behind you. It's very difficult for decent people to attract the money because most of the people with money are arseholes. In British politics, the money is not as important for the individual, but nonetheless, there's something clearly I think there's something very toxic about British politics that means that a lot of good people can't take it after a while. It just gets too depressing for them. So you always get MPs quitting Parliament every thing. Some of them will quit because, I mean, at the moment you've got a lot of Tory MPs who are saying they're standing down because they can't be asked to fight probably what is a lost general election. And even if they won their own seats, they don't want to be in opposition. Bear in mind, over 3/4 of the current Tory MPs have never known opposition. They've always been in government. So, but you always do get some stand down anyway because they're just sick of it. And those tend to be the decent ones. You know, the decent ones will just quit because they're just sick of the poisonous, environment that is Westminster. And you could get the same thing in other parliaments as well. Dog related question, I don't mind. We'll come to the end, so let's go through the last few quickly. I have a boxer who's been growling a lot today, seemingly for no reason. Do I know why dogs might growl without being aggressive? No, I'm not an expert on dogs, I'm afraid. Some of them, I mean, ours are just stupid. Ours will growl at all sorts of things. Unless you live anywhere near the Midlands, in which case maybe he heard the typhoons and you were far enough away that you didn't and he did. Because they have a broader range of hearing. I mean, that would be usually what I would think if a dog was reacting to something you weren't aware of, maybe outside of human hearing range, but within those. Ian Blackford, yeah, he shit the bed a little bit, didn't he? The ERG's agreement with Winter worries me. You don't suppose the retained EU law bill was leverage? I very much do think that. I'm not saying I am certain of it, but it was very much in my thinking when so many of the ERG agreed to this, and I said as much, but yes. I've seen predictions that inflation will come down this year. I mean, it's already coming down. Then go up again, apart from next winter as Russian oil and gas and grain and fertiliser comes offline. I mean, if you look at actually how much oil and gas Europe in general has been buying from Russia, it's massively come down. And it's still winter. It's massively come down. So we'll have to see. I mean, I don't know. But I mean, inflation will certainly come down. It's already coming down. It's just that it will always be too high because we are always paying a Brexit premium on everything we're importing. And because we're having to import more things than we did as well, food, not necessarily bulk, but things like food, that's a major cost for lots of people. But anyway. Theresa May's your MP. Some people here really like her, sadly. A lot of people do. When an MP has been an MP for a very long time, by definition, the people in the local area will generally regard them. That is why it's always a bit dodgy if someone... See, that's where the Tories have got a particular problem with MPs standing down. So when a well-known MP stands down... Well, if I go right from the beginning really quickly as my last point. So when a new MP comes, like the old MP's retired or dead or something like that, so they select a new candidate, they win because it's a safe seat, but it's only because of the party they won. So, but then if they're, if they work hard or they've got any skills, they can make a name for themselves locally and they build up a support base for them locally. So then usually what happens is you'll notice they start winning by larger majorities. And then what happens if that MP stands down? It comes back again. The new candidate, if it's a safe seat, will win, but usually with a reduced majority, because it's all about voting for the party. No one really has much regard for that candidate. They don't even know who it is. So obviously when the Tories look like losing some potentially safe seats, if Tory MPs are going to stand down in those seats, they're losing that sort of like MP premium, that personality premium, and it could actually make some Tory seats more vulnerable as a result. But I'll leave that happy thought as my last one. I'll go have my tea now. Thanks very much for coming on, everyone. We're back on again next week. Have a good evening, and until next time, I'll see you later.